The Earth is warming. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, the Earth's average temperature has risen by 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit over the past century and is projected to rise another 2 to 11.5 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 100 years. Climate change refers to changes in a region's overall weather pattern, including precipitation, temperatures, cloud cover, and sea level. It brings about increases in intensity of extreme weather events such as heat waves, tornadoes, hurricanes, and heavy rainfall. It causes longer, more severe droughts, the expansion of subtropical deserts, species endangerment, and the extinction and loss of biodiversity. It brings forth a drop in agricultural yields, the spread of vector-borne diseases because of increased range of insects and acidification of oceans, creating drops in fishing yields and the death of coral reefs. All changes in the average temperature of the planet can translate to large and potentially dangerous shifts in climate and weather. Rising global temperatures have been accompanied by changes in weather and climate. The planet's oceans and glaciers have experienced some big changes. Oceans are warming, ice caps are melting, and sea levels are rising.
The melting of the ice in the polar region is connected to our protection of our infrastructure in the Gambia. So every point on the earth is connected to the other some way or the other. You either have a direct impact or an indirect impact on what happens in the other region.
As these and other changes become more pronounced in the coming decades, they will likely present challenges to our society and our environment. The Gambia lies within the Sahel region of West Africa and is considered as the least developed country, with poverty estimated at around 50%. Reducing poverty and achieving the Millennium Development Goals is a policy priority of the government of the Gambia and is strongly reflected in the Programme for Accelerated Growth and Employment, page 2012 to 2015. However, a key impediment to reducing poverty is the limited resource base. Agriculture, fisheries, and tourism together account for some 40% of the GDP and depend heavily on the state of its natural resources. Addressing the policy priorities of the government of the Gambia, therefore, also includes addressing the environmental changes the country is facing.
Climate change means abnormal occurrences of elements of climate. I'm talking about wind, I'm talking about rainfall, I'm not talking about other forces that are acting on the land side. So when torrential rains are experienced, that's another very serious source of hazard.
Because climate change is identified as something which is an emerging issue for many, many countries around the world. And those developing countries that find it difficult to actually cope with their own particular agendas were given additional specific funding, financial support from the European Union to look at these issues and find out what they were, how they were impacting the country, and what measures could be put in place to adapt and mitigate the impact.
The Gambia's coastal zone consists of 70 kilometers of open ocean coast and 200 kilometers of sheltered coast. Its low-lying coastal areas are particularly vulnerable to climate change impacts. During these last decades, major climate-related changes have induced coastal erosion, mangrove dieback, salinization of rice fields, loss of marine habitats, and decline of fish stocks.
léegi daal dafa xaw a manqué su muy jógee daa sori daal moo waral manqué bi waaw dégg nga mais bu njëkk moom da nga daan laxa fii rek benn mbaal rek gaal yi fees mu ñëw mais léegi yaa ngi gaal yi wor dem ba guddi ay waxtu ñëw indi ñetti paan fukki paan juróomi paan
falinta ba falinta ba kele to la ja ñew saabe dame jang ñe ko kole ya bata jan akole ya tale
ɗum toon nabbosol ka wara ni nga samba a ɗoma ndimbi doron se fe mbasoto je ɓaɗa sa en boso seyta fomale aka mesiya be sunta ji manko ne kan ji manko.
In some areas, the beach has been retreating at a rate of 1 to 2 meters per year, threatening tourism infrastructure and associated livelihoods. With a 1 meter increase in sea level, some 92 square kilometers of land in the coastal zone would be inundated, with the entire capital city of Banjul at risk.
Erosive forces of the waves, we have seen all over the place that we are losing our beach line. Some will tell you that 150 meters parts of Banjul beach line, and the Muslim and Christian cemeteries, these were well within on the land side, downward side, but now they are gone.
If sea level rise happen here, it will affect us all. There will be changes, and if we don't adapt, it will affect our livelihood, and we won't survive.
The city, the capital city, Banjul, 70% of which is below sea level. According to the projections, if we continue with business as usual scenarios, it would be submerged, and a total area of 92 kilometers square that would come all the way to Stinkona and going all the way to Bunyadu. All of that is going to be submerged.
According to research, when you look at the Gambia, for instance, around the Banjul area, because 1 meter rise in sea level will actually cause a big disaster. According to the researchers, even the capital city can be submerged. So actually, that's a big threat as far as I am concerned. And when you look at the other threat, will be in agriculture sector. You see, because of the rain variability, and all these are effects of climate change.
In those days, the rainfall was just marvelous. It was really appreciated. It comes frequently, and it comes at huge volume of water that you receive at least within a period. It's quite different from nowadays when it rains today, it may take up to 2 weeks without rain. And if you are lucky to have an interim rain, it will just be drizzling, not what we call actual rainfall that can sustain crop production.
Further inland, soil salinization in riparian areas resulting from sea level rise and saline intrusion is impact negatively on farming.
Because one of the most serious impact of climate change around this area is salt intrusion. As a result of climate change, we are beginning to see a lot of salt intrusion into rice fields. As a result, most women are beginning to lose previous areas that they used to cultivate rice. It is having a serious impact on food security in the area. Most women are hardly able to produce even 3 months of food for the family. So you can see the serious impact of it. It's like 9 months of the year, women and men have to depend on rice from the shops, where in the past 20, 30, 40 years ago, they were able to produce enough, and they wouldn't even need rice from the shops.
The overall objective of the GCCA support project to the Gambia for integrated coastal zone management and the mainstreaming of climate change is to contribute to the capability of the government and people of the Gambia to adapt to increased climate variability and change.
Gambia is a low-lying area, okay? And as a result, it is affected by climate change in a number of ways, right? One of the negative effects of climate change is sea level rise, right? Now this sea level rise leads to erosion, like coastal erosion, and coastal erosion around our coastal area is so serious that it poses threats to tourism infrastructure and livelihoods, right? And if you look at the economic concentration of infrastructure around our coastline, that makes it quite a challenge and quite important, for interventions to address climate change effects around this area.
And this is why we developed a coastal protection project, one of which was the GCCA funded project, which is 3.86 million euros.
Its specific objectives are to strengthen the national level capacity to plan for and respond to climate change impacts in coastal areas and to provide support and guidance to mainstreaming of climate change into development planning.
To take examples of what might be impacting the Gambia are then to translate them into something which would then feed into preparation of a climate change policy, which is the second component of the project. The first component being managed by the National Environment Agency and the second component managed by the Department of Water Resources.
The government of the Gambia created a National Climate Committee in 1992. Its responsibilities include awareness raising on climate change, inventories of sources of greenhouse gas emissions, assessments of impacts of climate change, and options for adaptation to climate change. The Department of Water Resources, with the Ministry of Fisheries and Water Resources, plays a leading role in monitoring and predicting climate change.
In 2010, the temperature, the atmospheric temperature in the Gambia has rise to about 0.3 degrees Celsius. The temperatures will rise to about 3.9 degrees Celsius by 2100.
The National Environmental Agency has the mandate to coordinate all activities that relate to environmental issues under the oversight of the National Environmental Management Council. The agency is responsible for the implementation of the GEAP, and its director serves as a national focal point for the Global Environmental Facility.
The National Environment Agency in the Gambia is the lead government institution that is responsible for sound planning and management of the environmental issues in this country, that serve as a lead advisory body for the government of the Gambia. Therefore, it has a key role when it comes to the Global Climate Change Alliance project, which currently is being hosted by the National Environment Agency to implement component 1.
This is a very important program and even has a unit with staff who are daily working on to ensure that the coastal and marine environment is protected. Now, we have a coastal and marine environment working group. This is a very powerful one and brings together all the institutions that have a mandate or stake in the coastline.
And within this project, it has helped us to start building what we call the integrated coastal zone management. Series of studies have been conducted, and also capacity building has been done in terms of training our staff and other stakeholders in coastal monitoring, in particular the members of the coastal unit.
So if we come to form our a body that ensures that no one's interest is left out, it means that we have a very powerful institutional arrangement that will ensure that the gains of this GCCA project are carried forward.
Government, after preparing the National Adaptation Programs of Action, NAPA, in 2007, came up with 10 priority programs for adaptation in this country. After 1997, the priority was coastal protection, because we've seen the impact of erosion along the coastline.
The need for coastal adaptation is widely recognized as a priority. Restoration and protection of the coastal environment is one of the 10 project profiles identified in the National Adaptation Program of Action, NAPA, with the overall objective to support an integrated approach and the protection of physical infrastructure, economic and cultural assets located within the coastal zone. Coastal zone management is also identified as a high priority issue under the Gambia Environmental Action Plan.
There is hardly an option not to work against climate change, to ensure that our systems are preserved, or there is only minimal damage to whatever is there, but the main infrastructure, the major economic sectors are protected. These are very important, and that's why this project has a very big component on protection measures.
The NEA's operational areas is the so-called Coastal and Marine Environment Program, supported by a Coastal Zone Management Unit, and supposed to be responsible for the coordination of other stakeholders' actions within the coastal zone.
The idea of focusing on integrated coastal zone management was to give the Gambians, and especially the two agencies that are involved, the National Environment Agency and the Department of Water Resources, which has climate change policy, to give them specific examples of the sort of thing that climate change can mean.
Mainstreaming climate change into development to make sure the knowledge base for integrating climate change into key sectors is strengthened and a national climate change policy is formulated is one of the main objectives of the project. To achieve the project results, a participatory integrated coastal zone management process for the country will be established, focusing on coastal adaptation to the impacts of climate change.
In the case of the integrated coastal zone management, you've got the coastal erosion issue, you've got the threats related to, in the cases where you have it, heavy rainfall, which can cause flooding.
The National Environmental Agency is the lead agency for Component 1.
Component 1, as I said, is about integrated coastal zone management. What that means is that every action on the coastline should henceforth be harmonized with all others. This is very important. We need to have an institutional mandate to effectively coordinate the work of others, and that is what is supposed to be subsumed under the integrated coastal zone management that NEA will ultimately serve as a secretariat for. So, in a nutshell, NEA has a very big and important role to play, with others, of course, in ensuring that our coastline is protected for now and the interest of the posterity.
There are 3 expected results for Component 1, which states that participatory and self-sustainable integrated coastal zone management process is established, providing guidance and direction on future climate resilience management of the coastal zone.
Integrated coastal zone management program is just at the beginning. All the multi-stakeholders were invited, and they were giving their respective roles in order to perform to identify their role in their respective areas and support to come out with a plan in order to extend the support for the effective implementation of the plan.
This component one good thing we will be able to do with it is we will be able to develop what we call the integrated coastal zone management policy, and we will be putting on guidelines on how we should be able to address issues within the coastal and marine environment.
And for component 1, we have actually realized greater, improvement as far as the implementation is concerned. And now that a midterm review we have done for that project, and we have looked at the document, and we have do our final review and submit. I think that's actually an achievement.
So at policy level, we coordinate all the activities of the GCCA. You also recall that there is going to be a policy development as part of the mainstreaming of climate change into the development sectors in the country. So we as a policy making institution would be the key institution responsible for the policy aspect.
Demonstration and research projects are being supported by grants through calls for proposals.
Also through the successful implementation of Component 1, we have been able to award grants to 6 key institutions, all right, that would implement project intervention on awareness creation regarding climate change.
enhancing coastal ecosystem and livelihood resilience to climate change are priorities, and developing viable alternatives to sand extraction for the construction industry.
Sand mining and fish landing are not always consistent. There are so many areas that are best areas for fish landing and other programs to do with the marine resource exploitation are depleted or destroyed by sand mining. So we need to make sure that we know first, minimize the level of sand mining.
This is the Kachume sand mining area. It is the only sand mining area around this end which supply tons of sand to the building industry in the Combos, right from Banjul coming right down to Katong. These are the areas where they get sand. Such being the case, and the area's location close to the sea, it is predicted that in the near future, looking at the climate change pattern and the sea level rise due to the ice melting in other parts of the globe, this area would one time be flooded. What could have been a forest have now turned to a barren land, a land that cannot be used anymore. So these are the problems that we are facing here. The people that are working here knows that the sun is finished at the moment. If you look around, you can see that they have been digging and digging and have now reached the water table. So water will be coming from underground and water will be coming from the sea. Within a short period of time, this area will be no more accessible.
The rate of replenishment is not so high. So in other words, there is a negative impact that is experienced. If we don't, and coupled with the erosive forces of the waves, we have seen all over the place that we are losing our beachline.
Gender is particularly relevant in assessing vulnerability to climate change, since women tend to be the most marginalized and vulnerable members of society. The project is facilitating the involvement of women in the design and implementation of project activities.
Ha ba ntol musama do ko lalate nka sama do ko nka gadno do ko yo alfal awala falungo bata men sambanan sama je bi ka futa si mango ninga do ko ase falin ala fenke dula to janninga be ke so bonda nin akaja ha nin je amanki arintala alhanga kursi nyamen ntole ben na wulula no ma to men min be caring anin bi men be caring e man killimut nin be je ka sotole ka soton fa soto anyama tinto kamu ba to mu bar bi je akada sale.
Component 2 on mainstreaming of climate change into development. This requires developing a well-defined policy that integrates adaptive measures for climate change into sector planning, budgeting, and programming. Technical coordination and implementation of activities under Component 2 rests with the Department of Water Resources.
We are working very hard to expand these studies, that the findings that we have, and then to share it with all the stakeholders in the country. If people know the impact, the science behind the climate change, and that's going to be easier for them to adopt to the system.
The main idea behind Component 2 is to come up with a draft policy, climate change policy for the country, which will be further submitted and for possible adaptation by the Gambia government.
The second component to work, you had to take working examples, maybe some of the studies that have taken place along the coastal zone here with money from the project, but also integrate other considerations from other sectors and bring them into something which would be a holistic, climate change policy for the government. And that process is being managed by the Department of Water Resources.
There are 3 expected results for Component 2. To make sure that the knowledge base for integrating climate change into key sectors is strengthened and a national climate change policy is formulated.
Yeah, the way we implementing the activities, we form about 8 task teams, and each task team has an assignment to accomplish. Okay, having all these reports together, an expert will be hired to synthesize, put together all these various reports into one document that will be suitable to the draft or the formulation of a policy for the Gambia.
The second specific objective is to contribute to mainstreaming climate change into development planning. My role and the role of NAUSU is basically as the representative of the National Authorizing Officer, who is the Permanent Secretary Minister of Finance. We support him in the task of implementing EU-funded programs. Specifically for this GCCA program, our role is to ensure that funds are utilized efficiently. The second role that we play is to ensure that project activities are implemented in a timely manner. And thirdly, we ensure that we report properly and timely to the stakeholders. We also ensure that a steering committee is held regularly to guide the implementing partners so that the objectives of the project can be achieved.
A project steering committee oversees the overall direction of the project and is expected to meet semi-annually throughout the life of the project to implement the program estimates.
It requires a holistic approach from all angles, to address it. If that is not done, may God forbid, in the next few years, may God forbid, I wouldn't rule out famine.
It's affecting the road construction, the forestry, the agricultural activities, the settlements. Every sector is affected.
Climate change will affect everything that has to do with our life because it risks our life. Gambia is one of the 10 countries that have been considered as vulnerable to sea level rise.
So if the issues are not addressed in time, it will affect the society in a very greater sense.
And hopefully after today's evaluation we'll get some good projects that can be implemented and can be shown up as examples of best practice or examples to follow in the future.
We have also started a technology needs assessment to see what are the most appropriate technology for the country to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So we are on course in safeguarding the vulnerability and enhancing the resilience and the adaptive capacities of the people.
Ultimate objective of the project is to increase the capability of the Gambia government and the people. Where development does not have space for the local communities, it is never sustainable. We are happy that we have a grant program. We have already granted 6 to the tune of some $20 million for community projects of various kinds that are there to protect the environment or the coastal environment.